The day I found my mother's letters, the house smelled like dust and old rain, and I remember thinking that grief has a scent dry, bitter, and sharp enough to sting the back of your throat. I was 72 then, moving slowly through the rooms of the house where I'd grown up, the house I thought I knew better than my own hands. Mama had been gone for 3 years, buried on a gray afternoon with the pastor mispronouncing her name, and my knees aching so badly I thought I might collapse into the grave with her. I'd avoided sorting her things for as long as I could. Some doors you don't open because you know the ghosts inside will recognize you. But the roof had begun to leak, and I needed old paperwork, deeds, insurance, something, anything. That's how I ended up in the attic, climbing those narrow steps that groaned under my weight like they resented me for coming back. The attic was dim, lit by a single bare bulb that flickered as if unsure it wanted to remember me. Boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled in Mama's neat cursive. Christmas, bills, letters. That last one made my chest tighten. Letters. Mama was a letter writer. She wrote when she was angry, when she was lonely, when she couldn't say things out loud without crying. She wrote to relatives who never replied, to friends who'd moved away, even to my father long after he'd died. I used to tease her about it. She'd smile and say, "Some words need paper, not ears." I pulled the box down and sat on an old trunk, my joints complaining with every movement. Inside were dozens of envelopes tied with faded blue ribbon. Some were yellowed with age, others surprisingly crisp. I picked one at random and recognized her handwriting instantly. The loops of the M's, the careful slant, the way she underlined words she thought mattered. I opened one, then another, and another. They were exactly what I expected: memories, apologies, half-finished confessions. She wrote about my childhood, about mistakes she thought she'd made, about loving me fiercely but quietly, the way she loved everything. I cried, of course. Tears dropped onto the pages, blurring the ink, and I whispered, "I know, Mama, I know." Hours passed without me noticing. My back ached, my eyes burned, but I kept reading. It felt like she was sitting beside me, her voice low, careful, afraid I might finally hear the things she'd never said while alive. That's when I found the last envelope. It was at the bottom of the box, separate from the others. No ribbon, no date in the corner, which was strange for Mama. She dated everything. The envelope was thicker, heavier, and my name was written across the front. But something was wrong. The ink was darker, fresher, and the paper didn't smell like age. It smelled new. I turned it over, my hands trembling, and there it was in the corner, written so lightly I almost missed it. March 14th. My stomach dropped. March 14th was the day Mama died. I remember it clearly. The doctor's voice, the beep of the machines going flat, the way her hand went slack in mine. She did not write letters that day. She did not speak. She did not open her eyes. I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe she'd written the date earlier. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Grief does that. It rearranges reality until nothing fits where it should. Still, my fingers wouldn't open the envelope. I sat there for a long time, listening to the wind tap against the attic window, feeling that familiar fear creep up my spine. The fear I'd known as a girl, when Mama would go quiet for days, when secrets filled the house thicker than smoke. Finally, I tore it open. The letter inside was only 2 pages long. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, same loops, same careful pressure, but the words were different, sharper, urgent. "My dearest," it began, and my breath caught because she hadn't called me that since I was a child. "If you are reading this, then I am already gone. I need you to know that some truths cannot be buried with me." I felt cold all over. She wrote about love and regret, about choices made out of fear, about a promise she'd broken long ago. With every line, my heart pounded harder, like it was trying to escape my chest. Then I reached the sentence that made my hands go numb. "There is something you believe about your life that is not true. And there is someone you trust who knows this." I dropped the letter. The attic seemed to tilt, the walls leaning in, the light flickering violently now. Someone I trust knows this. Knows what? I thought of my sister, my late husband, my children. Faces flashed through my mind, like old photographs burning at the edges. My mother's words sat there between us, between the living and the dead, heavy and accusing, and the most terrifying thought of all settled into my bones like winter. If this letter was written on the day she died, then Mama had known something was coming, and she'd been trying to warn me. I picked the letter back up with hands that no longer felt like my own. My fingers were stiff, swollen with age, but the paper trembled as if it were afraid of me too. I told myself to breathe, the way the nurse once told me after my first heart scare, slow, steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth. But my lungs refused to listen. I forced myself to keep reading. "Please forgive me for not telling you sooner," Mama wrote. "I was afraid. Not of losing you, but of what you might lose if you knew." That sentence alone reopened 100 old wounds. Mama was always afraid of things slipping away, people, stability, love. Fear had shaped her life like water shapes stone, quietly, relentlessly. But fear of telling me something this big. She wrote about the past, about the years before I was born, about how the world looked then, harder, stricter, less forgiving. How women were expected to swallow their pain and smile through it. How secrets weren't just kept, they were enforced. I read on, my heart beating so loudly I wondered if the house could hear it. "There are stories families tell themselves," she wrote, "and then there are the truths they lock away so tightly they forget the key exists." I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry, like I'd been chewing dust. She mentioned my father next, my supposed father. She didn't say his name right away, just described him as kind, gentle, steady. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who smelled of pipe tobacco and engine oil, who kissed Mama's forehead every morning before work. "He loved you deeply," she wrote, "in his own quiet way. And I loved him for that." Relief flickered briefly through me. At least that part hadn't been a lie. But then the tone shifted. "There was another man," Mama wrote, and my breath caught so sharply it hurt. "Before him, brief, reckless, impossible." The attic seemed to shrink around me. She described a summer when she was young, before marriage, before responsibilities settled into her bones. A man who made her feel seen, alive, foolish. A man who promised everything and disappeared just as quickly. I felt sick. This wasn't just confession. This was excavation. I did not know the truth at first, she continued. Or perhaps I did, and I refused to look at it. My eyes burned as I read the next line. I did not know whose child you were until it was already too late to change anything. I pressed my hand to my chest, afraid my heart might simply stop. Too late. Too late for what? The words blurred as tears spilled freely now, soaking into the paper like blood into bandages. My mind raced backward through my life, replaying moments I'd never questioned. The way relatives would comment on my hair, my eyes, my height, how different I was. How Mama would smile too quickly and change the subject. I'd always assumed it was coincidence. Mama wrote about guilt, about praying the truth would never matter, about watching me grow and loving me so fiercely that biology became irrelevant until it didn't. Then came the sentence that made my vision tunnel. He knows, she wrote. And he has always known. He, not they. Not someone. He, my sister? No. My husband? God help me, no. My children? Impossible. My thoughts landed where I least wanted them to. The man I had called father. My chest tightened painfully. That man had been dead for 20 years, buried beside Mama, his name etched into stone like certainty itself. He knew? How could he have known? And why hadn't he ever said a word? I kept reading, afraid to stop, afraid of what waited at the end. He stayed. Mama wrote, "He chose you, he chose us." But promises were made, and silence was the price. I remembered how quiet he'd been, how he'd look at me sometimes with an expression I'd never understood, something like sadness, something like pride. I'd mistaken it for distance. Maybe it was restraint. Mama's handwriting grew shakier toward the end, the lines uneven, hurried. "There is one more truth," she wrote. "One I never intended for you to find this way." My throat closed. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and leaned closer to the page, as if proximity could soften the blow. "The letter you hold was not written before I died." The attic went silent. No creak of wood, no wind. Even the light seemed to steady, holding its breath with me. "I wrote it after," Mama continued. "Or rather, I finished it then." A chill crawled over my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. I knew my time was ending. I felt it in my bones, the way women in our family always do. I asked for help. Help? My mind struggled to catch up. "There was someone there with me," she wrote. "Someone who loved me once and still loved me enough to listen." The words throbbed on the page. I dictated this letter because my hands could no longer hold the pen. The date is the day I spoke the truth aloud. My heart pounded wildly now. Dictated, someone else wrote it. Someone alive. Someone who had heard Mama's final confession and put it on paper. Someone who knew everything. The final lines were short, blunt, merciless. "When you are ready, ask him why he stayed silent, ask him what he was protecting, and ask yourself if you truly want the answers." The letter ended there. No signature, no goodbye, I lowered the pages into my lap, staring at the familiar slant of the handwriting that suddenly felt foreign, almost cruel. My mind screamed questions, each louder than the last. Who was the man from that summer? Was he still alive? Had he been the one at her bedside? Had he written these words with shaking hands while my mother lay dying? And then another thought struck me sharp and terrifying. If this letter had been dictated, then it had been delivered here by someone who knew exactly where to hide it. Someone who expected me to find it. I pushed myself to my feet, my knees screaming in protest, and looked around the attic with new eyes. The shadows no longer felt empty. They felt occupied, watching. For the first time since Mama died, I felt her absence not as a hollow ache, but as a presence pressing, urgent, unfinished. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the fear and the grief, a question took root that would not let go. What else had my mother taken to the grave, and who had decided it was finally time for me to dig it back up? I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn. The letter spread out in front of me like a body I couldn't bring myself to cover. The house creaked and sighed the way it always had, but now every sound felt deliberate, as if the walls themselves were trying to speak and waiting for me to listen properly this time. I made tea I never drank. It went cold beside my elbow. My hands kept smoothing the paper, flattening wrinkles that weren't there, as though if I handled it gently enough, Mama might forgive me for reading what she never had the courage to say aloud. "Ask him," she'd written. Him. That word followed me through the house like a shadow. By morning there was only one name echoing in my head, no matter how much I tried to avoid it. Caleb Rowe. I hadn't said that name out loud in over 50 years. It tasted strange in my mouth, like a foreign language my tongue no longer remembered how to shape. Caleb Rowe had been Mama's childhood friend, or that's what she told everyone. He lived 3 houses down when I was little, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands that were always stained with grease or dirt. He laughed too loudly, stayed too long, and vanished suddenly one autumn when I was about 12. Mama said he'd moved away, but Mama had said many things. My heart began to race again as memories surfaced, uninvited. Caleb lifting me onto his shoulders during the town parade. Caleb fixing my broken radio when Father said it was beyond saving. Caleb watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable even then, though I never understood why. "You've got your mother's eyes," he used to say. No, he'd said, "You've got eyes like mine." I hadn't remembered that part until now. By mid-morning, I was dressed and standing in front of the hallway mirror, staring at a face I suddenly didn't trust. The lines were deeper now, the hair silver and thinning, but the eyes, those eyes looked back at me with a question they'd apparently been asking my whole life. "Who are you?" Caleb Rowe lived in a nursing home 2 towns over. I knew this because my sister had mentioned it once, in passing, years ago, with the same tone she used to discuss weather or grocery prices. She hadn't looked at me when she said it. That, too, now felt deliberate. The drive there felt longer than it was. Every mile peeled back another layer of denial. I kept thinking of Mama in that hospital bed, her voice weak but determined, dictating the truth to a man who had once loved her recklessly enough to leave a permanent mark on all our lives. When I arrived, the building smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. The receptionist smiled too brightly, asked me who I was there to see. "Caleb Rowe," I said. She checked the clipboard, nodded. "Room 214. My legs felt heavy as I walked down the hall. Each step echoed too loudly, like a countdown. I stopped outside the door and pressed my palm flat against the wood, just for a moment, steadying myself. If Mama was right, if this man was the one, then everything I thought I knew about myself had been built on borrowed ground. I knocked. "Come in," a voice called, thin but unmistakable. He was smaller than I remembered, folded into himself like a coat that had been hung up too long. His hair was white, his skin papery, but when he looked up at me, his eyes were sharp, alert, and familiar. He knew immediately. I could see it in the way his breath caught, in the way his hand tightened on the arm of his chair. "You found it," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't ask which it. My silence answered him. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit," he said softly. "Please." I sat, the letter burning in my purse like a secret that refused to stay buried. "She told you not to come until you were ready," he continued, his voice trembling now. "I hoped you'd take longer." Anger surged through me so suddenly it made my vision blur. "You wrote it," I said. "You wrote her words and dated it the day she died." He nodded slowly. "She made me promise." "Promise what?" I demanded. "To rewrite my life?" "No," he said, pain flashing across his face. "To tell the truth when she no longer could." I pulled the letter out and placed it between us like evidence. "You knew," I said. "You've always known." He closed his eyes. "Yes." The word landed heavy and final. "She didn't know at first," he said quietly. "Neither did I. But when you were born—" His voice cracked. There was no doubt. I thought of my father, the man who raised me, loved me, stayed. "He knew too," I whispered. "Yes." My chest tightened again, grief colliding with betrayal until I couldn't tell them apart. "And no one thought I deserved to know?" Caleb leaned forward, his eyes wet now. "We thought we were protecting you." That word, protecting, it echoed through my life, like a lie I'd been told so often it had almost become truth. He told me everything then, the summer, the love, the fear, how Mama chose stability over passion, how my father chose love over biology, how silence became the agreement that held our family together. "And the day she died?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why then?" Caleb's hands shook. "She didn't want to leave this world with you, still living a half-truth." Tears streamed down my face, unchecked now. "So you waited until she couldn't stop you," I said bitterly. "No," he whispered. "I waited until she asked me to stop lying. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the building, the distant sound of a television in another room, the fragile rhythm of an old man's breathing. When I finally stood to leave, my legs felt steadier than my heart. "There's more," Caleb said suddenly. I turned back. "She didn't just want you to know who you came from," he said. "She wanted you to know why she was afraid." A chill slid down my spine. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "Because the truth doesn't just change the past," he said. "It changes what's still waiting for you." And in that moment, I realized the letter hadn't been an ending at all. It had been an opening, and whatever lay beyond it was something my mother had spent her entire life trying to outrun. I drove home in silence, the radio off, the road blurring beneath me like a memory I didn't want to keep. Caleb's last words clung to me, wrapping around my thoughts, tightening every mile I put between that nursing home and myself. "It changes what's still waiting for you." I didn't know what that meant, and the not knowing gnawed at me worse than the truth I'd already swallowed. By the time I reached my house, my hands were aching from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. My shoulders knotted like I'd been bracing for a crash that never came. The house looked the same: white siding, crooked mailbox, the front porch where Mama used to sit in the evenings, shelling peas into a metal bowl and humming hymns she never quite finished. But something had shifted. I felt it the moment I stepped inside, like the air had been rearranged while I was gone. I placed my purse on the table and took the letter out again. I read it for the 4th time, then the 5th, hunting for something I'd missed. A word, a hint, a warning hidden between the lines. Mama had always been careful with words. She knew how to say one thing while meaning another entirely. It was then I noticed something strange. In the margin of the 2nd page, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right, was a faint indentation. "Not ink pressure." As if someone had written on the page above it with great force, my breath hitched. I carried the letter to the window and tilted it. Slowly, ghostly shapes emerged backward, pale but unmistakable. Another letter had once been there. I rummaged through Mama's old desk until I found a pencil, then gently shaded over the page the way we used to as children when searching for hidden messages. Lines appeared, words. My knees buckled, and I had to sit down. "Check the cedar chest," the message read. "Before she does." She. I stared at the words until they blurred. Who was she? My sister? Someone else? Another keeper of secrets I didn't yet know about? The cedar chest sat at the foot of Mama's old bed, untouched since her death. I'd avoided it for the same reason I avoided mirrors. Some mornings you never knew what might look back at you. My legs felt heavy as I carried myself down the hallway. Each step felt like trespassing, like I was crossing into territory Mama had never meant for me to enter alone. The bedroom smelled faintly of lavender and age. The cedar chest was exactly where it had always been, the wood darkened with time, the latch dull with tarnish. My hands hovered over it, trembling. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I didn't know who I was apologizing to. When I opened it, the smell hit me, first cedar, yes, but also old paper and something sharper. Fear, maybe. Or truth. Inside were folded clothes, neatly stacked, and beneath them a smaller box wrapped in cloth. My heart hammered as I unwrapped it. Photographs spilled out, not family portraits, not birthdays or holidays. These were candid, stolen moments. Mama laughing in a way I'd never seen. Mama standing beside Caleb, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back. Mama, pregnant young, scared, beautiful. And then my breath caught painfully in my throat. There was a photograph of me, not a baby, a teenager, sitting on the front steps, reading a book, unaware. The date on the back made my stomach twist. It was taken years after Caleb supposedly moved away. I dropped the photo like it burned. He'd been there, watching. I dug deeper, my hands moving faster now, desperation overtaking caution. Beneath the photographs were letters, more letters, but these were not written by Mama. They were written to her, in Caleb's handwriting, and in another hand I didn't recognize at all. The other letters were sharp, angry, demanding, threatening, even. I read fragments enough to piece together the shape of something ugly and unfinished. You promised. She has a right to know. If you don't tell her, I will. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. Mama hadn't just been afraid of hurting me. She'd been afraid of exposure. At the bottom of the chest, beneath everything else, was a sealed envelope. Unlike the others, this one was addressed to my sister Elaine. I sat on the edge of the bed, envelope in my lap, my thoughts racing. Elaine had always been practical, distant. She'd handled Mama's funeral arrangements with a calm that had irritated me at the time. She'd insisted on sorting the will quickly. She'd been the one to suggest selling the house. You don't need all this, she'd said. Now I understood why. I didn't open the envelope, not yet. Some instinct told me this was a line I couldn't uncross without consequences I wasn't ready to face. Instead, I put everything back exactly as I found it and closed the cedar chest with a soft click that sounded far too final. That night, I dreamed of Mama standing in the doorway of my childhood bedroom. She looked young again, her hair dark, her eyes full of warning. "Be careful who you trust," she said. When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears and my phone was ringing. "Elaine!" I stared at the screen until it stopped. Then it rang again. I answered. "Did you go through her things?" she asked immediately, her voice tight. The question chilled me. "Yes," I said slowly. A pause. Too long. "Then you need to stop," she said. "Some things were never meant for you." The anger rose hot and sudden. "Like my own life?" I snapped. Silence. That was all the answer I needed. "She told you," I said. "Didn't she?" Elaine exhaled shakily. "She told me enough. Enough to keep lying," I said. "You don't understand," Elaine replied. "This isn't just about you." I laughed bitterly. "It never is it? Listen to me," she said, her voice urgent now. "If you keep digging, you're going to open something you can't close. I thought of the letters, the photographs, the threats. I think it's already open," I said quietly. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dim light, the weight of generations pressing down on me. I realized then that Mama hadn't just left me a confession. She'd left me a choice. I could put everything back, lock the chest, sell the house, and let the past stay buried. Or I could pull every secret into the light, no matter who it burned. And deep down, beneath the fear and the grief, I knew exactly what my mother had raised me to do. She had taught me to endure. But now, At the end of her life and the unraveling of mine, she was asking me to be brave. By morning, my decision had settled into me like a stone, heavy, unavoidable. I had spent my life enduring loss, disappointment, silence. But endurance had its limits, and Mama, in her final act, had pushed me right up against mine. I called Elaine before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the second ring, breathless, as if she'd been waiting beside the phone. That alone told me everything. "We need to talk," I said. There was a pause, then a sigh that sounded older than both of us. "I knew this day would come," she murmured. "I just hoped it wouldn't be like this." "Like what?" I asked, with me finally asking questions. "No," she said softly. "With Mama gone to take the blame." I closed my eyes. "Then start talking." She asked me to come over. Her house was smaller than mine, cleaner, stripped of sentiment the way Elaine stripped emotion from everything. When I arrived, she was already seated at the dining table, hands folded, eyes red but dry. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "You found the chest," she said. "Yes." "And the letters." "Yes." She nodded slowly, as if confirming a diagnosis. "I was 15 when Mama told me," she began. "She said if anything ever happened to her, it would fall on me to keep things from breaking apart." "Breaking apart?" I echoed. "You mean me?" She flinched. "I mean all of us." She told me then about the man whose handwriting I didn't recognize. His name was Walter Green. He had been a cousin by marriage, someone who came around just often enough to notice patterns others ignored. He suspected the truth early, too early, and he didn't approve of silence. "He wanted to tell you," Elaine said. "He said it was cruel not to." "And you agreed," I said. "Yes," she admitted. "At first. Then life happened. Walter moved away, angry and unresolved. Mama grew sicker, and Elaine young. Practical Elaine learned that peace often came at the cost of honesty. She begged me," Elaine whispered. "She said if you ever knew, it would undo you. She was afraid you'd feel like you didn't belong anywhere." I thought of all the times I'd felt exactly that way without knowing why. "Did Father know?" I asked. Elaine nodded. "Before he died, Mama told him the night she found out she was sick. He said blood didn't raise a child. Love did. That was when I finally cried. Not pretty tears, the kind that shook my chest and bent me forward until Elaine had to reach across the table and steady me, both of us clinging to something we'd broken together. But there's more," she said quietly. I looked up, dread pooling in my stomach. "Mama was afraid of something else," Elaine continued. "Not just the truth coming out, but what it might cost you." She stood and walked to a cabinet, pulled out an envelope, yellowed and thin. "She told me to give you this, only if you insisted on knowing everything." I took it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, older than the others, written in Mama's earliest handwriting. She wrote about inheritance, about land, about money hidden away long before my father entered the picture. Money tied not to the man who raised me, but to the man who made me, Caleb. If I acknowledged the truth publicly, legally, I could claim it, but doing so would shatter the careful version of history my family had lived inside for decades. It would mean courtrooms, records, questions. It would mean rewriting not just my past, but Elaine's, and our children's, and perhaps even Mama's legacy. She thought knowing would ruin you, Elaine said, and that money would make it worse. I folded the letter carefully, as if neatness could restore order. So you decided for me, I said. All of you did. Yes, Elaine said. And I'm sorry. The apology landed softer than I expected. I had imagined anger, confrontation, some dramatic explosion. Instead, there was just grief, shared, tangled, unavoidable. That evening, I returned home and opened the cedar chest one last time. I laid everything out on the bed, the photographs, the letters, Mama's final confession. I sat there until dusk deepened into night, listening to the old house breathe around me. I thought of Caleb, alone in that nursing home, carrying a lifetime of restraint. I thought of Father, choosing love without recognition. I thought of Mama, torn between truth and protection, leaving behind a trail of paper because words were all she ever trusted. And finally, I thought of myself. I realized then that knowing where I came from did not erase where I had lived. It did not undo bedtime stories, scraped knees, or hands that held mine through sickness and sorrow. It added to me, but it did not replace me. The next morning, I burned the threatening letters in the backyard fire pit. I kept Mama's. I kept the photographs. I placed Caleb's name into my heart, not my legal documents. I did not claim the inheritance. I did not go to court. I did not correct the record. Instead, I visited Caleb one last time. I know, I told him, taking his hand. And that's enough, he cried then, quietly, the way men do when they've held something in too long. When he passed 6 months later, I attended the funeral as a friend. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, when I sit on the porch in the evenings, I sometimes feel Mama beside me, not as a ghost, but as a woman who loved imperfectly and tried her best. The letter written after her death rests in my drawer, not as a warning anymore, but as a reminder. Truth does not always demand to be shouted. Sometimes it only asks to be carried. And at 72, with a lifetime behind me, and whatever remains ahead, I finally understand that who I am is not defined by the secret of my beginning, but by the choice I made when I finally learned it. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest truths, but it does not erase them. It teaches you how to live alongside them, how to set an extra place at the table for what you know now, even if you didn't invite it. After Caleb died, the world grew quieter in a way I hadn't expected. Not emptier, just settled, as if something that had been hovering for decades had finally found a place to land. I returned home from his funeral with a strange calm in my chest, the kind that comes only after the storm has already done its damage and moved on. I thought the story was over then. I was wrong. A week after the funeral, a package arrived at my door. No return address, just my name, written carefully, deliberately. I stood there staring at it, that old familiar dread crawling up my spine again. Secrets, I had learned, don't always leave quietly. Sometimes they wait for you to sit down before they speak. Inside the package was a small leather-bound notebook, old, soft with use. I recognized it instantly. Mama's prayer journal. My hands shook as I opened it. I hadn't seen this notebook since I was a girl. She used to keep it hidden beneath her mattress, pulling it out only at night, when she thought no one could hear her whispering into the dark. I'd once asked her what she wrote in it, things I'm afraid to say to God out loud, she'd told me. The last pages were filled. Her handwriting smaller, shakier, but unmistakably hers. These weren't prayers the way most people think of them. They were reckonings. She wrote about me, about Elaine, about the lie she lived inside and the truth she never escaped. She wrote about how love can be both shelter and prison, and how a mother can convince herself she's protecting her child while quietly robbing her of choice. And then I reached the final entry. It was dated the night before she died. I have spent my life trying to control the damage, she wrote. But control is just fear dressed as care. If she ever reads this, I want her to know something I never knew how to say. My vision blurred as tears welled again, older now, heavier. She was never an accident, not of blood, not of love. She was wanted in every way that mattered, and if she chooses to forgive me, it will be the greatest mercy I have ever known. Tucked into the back cover was a single loose page, one sentence, pressed hard enough to leave an imprint, just like the letter. Let her live free. I sat there for a long time, the house wrapped around me, the late afternoon sun spilling through the windows and touching everything Mama had once touched. I thought about how many years I had lived under the weight of something unnamed, how many moments of my life had been shaped by a truth I couldn't see but somehow always felt, and I realized something quietly profound. Mama hadn't written that letter after her death to shock me. She had written it to release me. In the weeks that followed, I did something I'd never done before. I talked. Not to everyone, not dramatically, not loudly, but honestly. I told my children the truth, carefully, gently, without bitterness. I told them about the man who raised me and the man who made me, and how love can be bigger than biology and smaller than fear at the same time. They listened. They asked questions. They held my hands. Nothing broke. Elaine and I grew closer in an unexpected way, not because everything was forgiven instantly, but because it was finally visible. We stopped dancing around the empty spaces between us. We spoke Mama's name without flinching. We allowed ourselves to miss her without defending her. Sometimes, late at night, I take out the letter, the one dated the day Mama died. I run my fingers over the ink, over the pressure marks, over the place where her voice crossed the boundary between life and death. I no longer fear it. I understand it now. She did not write it from the grave. She wrote it from the edge, from that fragile place where love finally outweighs fear and silence becomes heavier than truth. At my age, people expect your life to narrow, to quiet, to fade neatly into what it has always been. But mine widened instead. Knowing the truth did not undo me. It stitched together pieces I didn't know were torn. I belong to every chapter of my life, the ones written in ink and the ones written in whispers. And when my time comes, when my hands grow too weak to hold a pen and my voice thins into memory, I hope I will be braver than my mother was in her youth, and just as brave as she was in the end, because secrets may shape us, but it is the truth finally faced that sets us free. I thought freedom would feel louder. I thought it would arrive with some dramatic shift in the air, some unmistakable sign that I had crossed from one version of myself into another. But freedom, I learned, comes quietly. It settles into your bones the way age does, slowly, gently, until one day you realize you are standing straighter than before. After the notebook arrived, after Mama's last words finally found their way into my hands, the house began to change, not in appearance, but in temperament. The shadows felt less accusatory. The silence no longer pressed against my ears. It was as if the walls, which had held so many unsaid things for so long, were finally allowed to rest. I started opening windows I'd kept shut for years. I aired out closets. I rearranged furniture. I packed away objects I had clung to out of habit rather than love. Each small act felt ceremonial, like I was preparing the space not for company, but for honesty, for myself. One afternoon, while sorting through old photo albums, I found a picture I had seen 100 times before, but never truly looked at. Mama was holding me as a baby, her face tired but radiant. Father stood beside her, one hand resting protectively on both of us. His smile was calm, resolved. For the first time I noticed his eyes. There was no doubt there, no hesitation, only choice. I pressed my fingers against the photo and whispered, "Thank you," not just for raising me, but for never letting his silence turn into resentment. He had loved me without conditions, without claims, and that, I realized, was the purest form of truth I had ever known. Weeks turned into months. Life continued in its ordinary, miraculous way. Bills arrived. The garden demanded tending. My knees complained louder than ever. And yet, beneath all of it, something fundamental had shifted. I stopped flinching when people commented on how I didn't quite resemble either parent. I stopped feeling the need to over-explain myself. I stopped wondering if I belonged. One evening, Elaine came over for dinner. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once read Mama's letter through tears and disbelief. This time, we ate slowly, comfortably, the kind of silence between us that didn't ask to be filled. "She would have hated how long we waited," Elaine said suddenly. I smiled sadly. "She would have understood why we did." Elaine nodded. "I think she was braver than we ever gave her credit for." "So were you," I said. She looked at me, surprised. "I don't feel brave. Bravery doesn't usually announce itself," I said. "Sometimes it just keeps going." Later that night, after Elaine left, I took Mama's prayer journal out one last time. I read the final pages again, then closed it gently and placed it in the cedar chest. Not hidden this time, kept. There's a difference. I no longer needed the letters to remind me of who I was. I carried it now. On my 73rd birthday, my children gathered around me with cake and laughter and far too many candles. They hugged me a little tighter than usual. My daughter kissed my cheek and whispered, "I'm proud of you." I didn't ask what for. I knew. As the years stretch thinner ahead of me now, I find myself thinking often about the stories we inherit and the ones we choose to pass on, about how truth does not erase love, and love does not excuse silence, but together they can still make something whole. Mama made mistakes, so did Caleb, so did Father, so did I. But in the end, what remains is not the deception, nor the timing of revelations, nor the fear that shaped so many decisions. What remains is the moment you finally stand inside your own life without apology. The letter written after my mother's death did not haunt me. It woke me. And when my own time comes, when my voice grows faint and my hands grow tired, I will leave no letters hidden in attics, no words pressed between pages for someone else to discover too late. I will tell the truth while I am still here, because love, when spoken honestly, does not need secrecy to survive. And that is the ending my mother, in her final courage, finally gave me. I believed that was the ending. I believed that once the truth had been spoken, once forgiveness had settled into its proper place, life would gently taper off into reflection and quiet mornings. That is what stories usually do when told neatly. They stop where the lesson becomes clear. But real lives do not end on lessons. They end on choices. The final one came to me on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed unless it changes you forever. I was sorting through paperwork at the dining table when I found the deed to the house. I had meant to sell it for years. Elaine had urged me to. The children worried it was too much for me now, too many stairs, too many memories. I'd always agreed in theory, postponed in practice. That day, with the sunlight slanting across the table and Mama's cedar chest visible down the hall, something in me resisted the idea more strongly than ever before. This house had held lies. Yes, but it had also held love strong enough to survive them. I walked through each room slowly, touching the door frames, the walls, the windows where seasons had passed like breath. In Mama's bedroom, I paused at the foot of the bed and looked at the chest one last time. For the first time, I didn't feel watched. I felt accompanied. I understood then that my mother's greatest fear hadn't been exposure. It had been inheritance not of money, but of silence. She'd worried I would live the same way she did, shaping my life around what could not be said, but I hadn't. I had chosen differently. That evening, I made phone calls, real ones. Not the polite check-ins or careful updates I'd mastered over the years, but honest conversations. I told my children I planned to keep the house. I told Elaine I wanted to turn the spare bedroom into something useful. I told myself out loud, standing alone in the kitchen, that I was allowed to decide what came next. The next morning, I called the local women's center. I didn't tell them my whole story. I didn't need to. I told them I had space. I told them I had time. I told them I knew what it felt like to carry something alone for too long. Within a month, a young woman named Ruth moved into the back room. She was quiet, pregnant, frightened in that familiar way that looks like politeness from the outside. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't tell me much at first. But I knew that language. We shared meals. We shared silence. Eventually, we shared stories, not all at once, not neatly, but honestly. One evening, she asked me why I lived alone in such a big house. I thought about Mama, about Caleb, about Father, about letters and choices and the weight of words unsaid. "I don't," I told her. "I live with everything that made me who I am." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. As the months passed, the house filled with life, again not loud, not chaotic, but purposeful, a place where truth was not demanded, but welcomed, where no one was asked to be smaller than they were. When Ruth's baby was born, I held that child in my arms and felt something close in my chest, not grief this time, but a circle completing itself, not blood, not secrecy, just presence. Mama would have understood that. Or perhaps she finally did. Sometimes, late at night, I sit at the desk and write letters I will never hide. I don't address them to anyone in particular. I write them to the future, to whoever might need them. To myself, on days when memory grows thin, I write about how love can be imperfect and still be real, how truth can arrive late and still matter, how silence can feel protective until it isn't. I keep those letters in a drawer that stays open. When people ask me now who I am, I don't hesitate. I am the daughter of the woman who raised me. I am the child of the man who chose me. I am the truth my mother finally trusted me to carry. And I am no longer afraid of what waits in the margins of my life, because nothing there can undo what I have already survived. The letter written after my mother's death did not steal anything from me. It returned me to myself, and that, after all these years, is the only inheritance that ever truly mattered. Some nights, when the house is quiet and even the clocks seem to pause out of respect, I sit alone at the kitchen table and listen to my own breathing. It sounds different now, less guarded, less hurried, as if my body finally understands that there is nothing left it needs to protect me from. Age teaches you many things, but the strangest lesson is this: the past does not loosen its grip until you stop pulling away from it. I had spent decades bracing myself against questions I couldn't name, answers I wasn't allowed to ask. And once the truth arrived late, imperfect, trembling, it did not break me. It steadied me. Ruth stayed for nearly a year. She left one morning with her baby bundled against her chest, eyes brighter than the day she arrived. We hugged in the doorway, and she whispered, "You saved me." I shook my head. "No," I said gently. "We just told the truth near each other." After she was gone, the house remained full, not with noise, but with intention. I turned the attic into a small sitting room. I painted over old stains without erasing what they meant. I left the cedar chest where it was, its lid closed but unlocked, like a promise instead of a warning. People still ask questions, of course. At my age, everyone assumes your story is finished, that you are only a summary now. They ask about my husband, my children, my health. They don't ask about the years that shaped me most. But sometimes, when the moment feels right, I tell a piece of it. I tell them that love can exist without permission. That family is built as much by choice as by blood. That silence can be inherited, but it doesn't have to be. I do not tell them everything, not because I'm afraid, but because I've learned the difference between secrecy and privacy. Mama never learned that distinction in time. She confused silence with safety, control with care. Yet in her final days, when her body was failing and her voice could barely carry, she did something she'd never done before. She trusted me. That letter written on the day she died, dictated through pain and fear and love, was her way of stepping aside, of saying, "You may carry this now, or you may lay it down. I carried it long enough to understand it. Then I laid it down. I still visit the cemetery sometimes. I bring flowers when I remember, not when I feel obligated. I sit between the two stones, Mama's, and the man who raised me, and I talk to them the way I wish we'd all talked when it mattered most. I'm all right, I tell them. I figured it out. The wind usually answers, rustling leaves, moving on, and when I leave, I don't look back, because my life is no longer something I am uncovering. It is something I am living fully, honestly, without waiting for permission from the past. If there is one thing I would tell anyone who finds themselves holding a truth too late, it is this: the timing does not decide the meaning. What you do with it does. My mother's letter did not arrive to haunt me. It arrived to finish what she could not, to pass me the pen. And I used it not to rewrite my beginning, but to choose my ending. An ending without locked boxes, without dates that don't make sense, without words pressed so hard they leave scars on the page. Just an ending shaped by openness, by courage, by a woman who finally understands that she was never missing anything at all. She was simply waiting to hear her own story told honestly at last. There is a particular kind of peace that arrives only when you stop looking over your shoulder. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand celebration. It simply sits beside you one day and stays. That is how the rest of my life began, not with answers but with permission. I stopped measuring my days against what might have been. I stopped wondering how things would look if the truth had arrived earlier, if Mama had been braver sooner, if men had spoken when they should have, if silence hadn't been treated like virtue. Those questions loosened their grip once I understood something simple and devastatingly clear. The past does not require my approval to exist, but the future requires my participation. So I participated. I planted a fig tree in the backyard where the old fire pit had been. I liked the symbolism of it, something living where things once burned. The first year, it barely grew. The second year, it surprised me. By the third, it bore fruit so sweet, it made me laugh out loud the first time I tasted it. "Late bloomers," I said to the tree one morning. Nothing wrong with that. My children visited more often, not because they were worried anymore, but because they wanted to. They lingered. They asked questions about my childhood I'd never known how to answer before, and now I answered them honestly, without flinching or editing myself into something easier to hear. I told them about their grandfather, the one who raised me, and how love is not diminished by what it does not biologically own. I told them about the man who helped bring me into the world, and how sometimes doing the right thing looks like stepping back instead of stepping in. I told them about their grandmother, not as a saint, not as a villain, but as a woman who loved deeply and feared deeply and finally chose truth when she had nothing left to lose. They listened. Nothing shattered. That was the great surprise of all of it. The world did not collapse because the truth existed. It expanded. Years passed, quietly, kindly. My body slowed in ways I could not argue with. My hands grew stiffer. My memory occasionally misplaced small things, keys, names, days of the week, but never the things that mattered, never the clarity. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine Mama sitting at the edge of my bed the way she used to when I was sick as a child. I imagine her wanting to say something and not knowing how to begin. In those moments, I speak first. "I'm not angry anymore," I tell her. "I understand." Understanding does not excuse harm, but it releases it from continuing to wound. If I have learned anything in these final chapters of my life, it is this: secrets rot when they are sealed away, but they transform when they are faced. They become context. They become history. They lose their power to shape us in the dark. The letter written after my mother's death was never meant to be a mystery that destroyed me. It was a bridge, fragile, imperfect, but real, between who I had been and who I was finally allowed to become. I crossed it slowly, on my own terms. Now, when I sit on the porch in the evening, watching the light soften across the yard, I feel complete in a way I never expected to, not because everything made sense, but because I made peace with what didn't. I am not the sum of what was hidden from me. I am not defined by what arrived too late. I am not unfinished because the truth waited. I am finished because I chose to live fully once it came. And when my own ending arrives, whenever it decides to, I will meet it without locked boxes, without unsent letters, without fear pressing words into silence. I will leave behind open drawers, windows cracked for air, and stories told out loud. Because that is what the letter gave me in the end. Not shock, not betrayal, not loss, but the courage to live the rest of my life unafraid of what the truth might say. And that is the kind of ending worth